welcome back to Radio Edict. 2024 marks the 10th year of Ashoka's prominence in Indian education, as the university has grown from infancy into adolescence. It's become less a radical experiment in Indian higher education and more a self-professed bastion of India's step into global academic prominence. No one is better placed to speak of the Ashoka vision, its possibilities, its roaring successes, its public and prominent failures, and its quiet compromises than the man to my right, Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, founding Vice Chancellor and current Chancellor of Ashoka University. Professor Mukherjee, welcome to Radio Edict. It was very recently Professor Andre Bette's birthday, his 90th, and he was, of course, the founding Chancellor of our university. And he, in partnership with you, were perhaps the sort of leading lights at the beginning in 2014. So let's start there. Let's start with yourself, with Professor Bette, founding team at Ashoka, and what it was that attracted you, as well as what it was about the specific post of founding Vice Chancellor that sort of pulled you into this university in 2014.
So before I go there, there's one very important element about my existence at Ashoka that you missed out in the intro. I'm also the professor of history.
Of course.
And I have been an active professor in the sense that I'm a full-time teacher. When I was Vice Chancellor, and I continue to be a full-time teacher when I'm Chancellor. I want to make this point because this is one of the things that drew me to Ashoka, which is the question that you asked. I love teaching and I wanted to teach, and Ashoka seemed to me a place where I could innovate and experiment with my teaching. All my teaching had been in a public university where the pedagogy is very different and not open to experimentation and innovation, which Ashoka seemed to be an opportunity to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I was attracted. And when I was offered the post of the founding Vice Chancellor, I made it very clear that I would have to be given the space and the time to teach. Only then would I take the Vice Chancellorship. And when it was pointed out that how would I manage both, so I said, that's my time management. I'll manage the best way I can. So, and Andre, who was the Chancellor, was a kind of a role model, because Andre Bette, apart from being India's most outstanding sociologist and social anthropologist, has been a very dedicated teacher at the Delhi School of Economics from a very young age. I mean, and Andre also loved teaching, and generations of students he has taught. So I think his presence and his support were both very crucial and very important in not just shaping my own trajectory in Ashoka, but also in the making of Ashoka in the initial years as India's leading undergraduate teaching university. That's how Ashoka started. And of course it has now matured and evolved into a teaching cum research university, but initially it was conceived of a teaching university, and that's what we wanted to first do and establish ourselves, that we would be a top-class teaching university for undergraduates. And I think we won that laurel very early on. I mean, within 2 or 3 years, we are already being acknowledged as being in the subjects that we were offering. And not in all subjects, because we are not offering all subjects. In the subjects that we were offering, we were already being recognized as the leading undergraduate teaching university. So, and there I think Andre played a very important role in the way that we styled our pedagogy, in the way that syllabi were drawn up, and so on.
what does that imply about perhaps the relationship between professors and students at the university, especially in the founding years, that it was primarily and focused teaching university? And I suppose a corollary to that, the next sort of logical step to that question would be, given now that the university has grown and the university places a premium on research, not just in terms of for the sake of the university itself in terms of its prominence, but also with professors and their incentive structures, what sort of perhaps gets left out if when there's a slight shift in those priorities?
Well, I don't think there has been a shift in priorities. There has been a shift in emphasis, if you like, because the priority was always there. Because what was the principal priority or the principal aspiration? That we would be a top-class university in India, and also a top-class university in global standards, which would automatically or almost by definition imply that teaching would be complemented by research. You cannot be a top-class university just by teaching undergraduates. You had to produce top-class research as well. That's how you would be measured. So that was already there. So that's why I emphasize that initially this was the what we were setting out to do, and then, as I said, we evolved. So one major change and major shift that has taken place, and you pointed to that in the way you framed the question. In our first year, 2014, if you leave out for the moment the 50 or 60 Young India Fellows, there were only 120 undergraduates. We were very minuscule, small, 128 is not. So one major consequence of that, class sizes were smaller. So one could innovate much more than one could in other places, because class sizes are smaller. The space for interaction between students and teachers was therefore much larger, and the whole public university model of sage on a stage, lecturing students just diligently copying whatever is being said, we chose to abandon that model, and classes became more interactive. That interactive process has become a little more complicated and problematic as class sizes have grown. But I'm absolutely certain that most professors and teachers at Ashoka navigate this problem in their own individual styles and ways, because no teacher's style is exactly the same as another teacher's style. So, and that's also one of the attractions of teaching, that we can approach our chosen fields and chosen subjects in our own particular way, and not necessarily mimic or parrot another person's teaching. So I think we're all trying to do this, and in that sense, teaching is never kind of completed, because it's always a learning process. Every class is not just a learning process for the student, it's also a learning process for the professor. And in that sense, not just every cohort, I think every class, every lecture is also unique by itself, because every lecture presents its own challenges of how you have interacted or how you want to interact and so on. So what questions are going to be asked? These are all unpredictable elements. You cannot really guess what is going to take place in the classroom once you have entered the classroom. And added to this now, of course, is the emphasis that is being put on research output by faculty, and most importantly, research that is coming out of our PhD students, the theses that are being written by fourth year undergraduates, in some cases, in some disciplines, in the MA classes as well. So, and I think these are becoming very essential elements in the making of Ashoka and the evaluation of Ashoka as well. I mean, some very top class research from the faculty in some of the subjects have already appeared and already being recognized.
I just wanted to double click on the idea of the public university that you mentioned, because your academic career, your life really has been shaped by both the idea of the public university as well as people sort of committed to the idea of the public university. So from Presidency to JNU, from people like Burunde, for instance. Tell us a bit about that, about what the public university was like as a student, and how perhaps it's changed over time, but also, and I'm perhaps referring to JNU more specifically here, about your time there, specific, also to do with your cohort, Professor Bhattacharya, of course, over here, Chitra Joshi, Shobita Panja, and perhaps your reflections on that.
So, in this particular sense, I was very fortunate. As a student, as an undergraduate, I went to Presidency, and the history honors class was very small. We were 15 of us only. Okay, so there was scope for greater interaction. Not that in Presidency greater interaction took place, because it was a very status conscious, hierarchical institution, Presidency was. And except for one teacher, at least in history, you weren't encouraged to question or challenge a teacher. You just listened to that person. And but nonetheless, the fact that it was a small class meant that you got individual attention. And Presidency also had a very strong tutorial system. So you had every week or every 10 days you were assigned a tutor who gave you essays to write, and that's where actually the in camera the discussions took place. And you were actually, in my case particularly, that's where I was taught how to write, how to structure an essay and things like that. And then again, when I came to JNU, I was very fortunate. This might sound a bit improbable to all of you. 1974, which is the year I came up to JNU, 74 July, there were less than 1,000 students in the entire university. Okay, so it was even smaller than Ashoka. And so as a result, especially, and I would say out of the 1,000 students, 500, 600 lived in hostels and campus. So that 500, 600, everybody knew everybody, irrespective of subjects and disciplines they were studying. And the history center to which I belonged as a student was also, it had some fabulous teachers and scholars like Romila Thapa, Sarvapalli Gopal, Vipin Chandra, Sabbasachi Bhattacharya. And the pedagogy in the history center was also anchored around tutorials. So 50% of your total credit was evaluated on the basis of essays that you wrote, and then there was an exam. So that was the other 50%. So again, there I think writing, thinking for yourself, by yourself, all these received greater emphasis. I don't know whether what's happened to JNU now. I have no idea what's happening in the classroom, whether the tutorial system still exists or doesn't exist. So I shouldn't comment on JNU today, but in our time, in the middle 70s. This was very definitely the modus operandi, if you like. And I'll just give you one example of how you were forced to think for yourself. In one of, I think it was my first tutorial essay with S. Gopal, where he said, what's the essay topic? He said, I wrote a book called British Policy in India, 1858 to 1905. I want you to review that book. Okay, and he said, don't give me fluff by praising it. I'll penalize you for that. So actually, the teacher was challenging you to critique the teacher, which was an astounding experience for me. And I think I gained enormously from that kind of teaching method. And, I still tell my students that please feel free, and I'll be very happy if you critique me. In fact, I think I will feel fulfilled as a teacher if my students are critiquing me. I learned that from my teachers.
Would be perhaps a bit irresponsible of me, as someone who's got the space to ask you questions, especially when we're having a conversation about public universities, to mention the criticisms that have been leveled against ours, right? That it is expensive, incredibly, it is exclusive to a large degree. It is perhaps homogenous in terms of socioeconomic background to a large extent. And one of the most recent criticisms was that there has not been a concerted effort to address the caste homogeneity at Ashoka. And as someone who has a background in public university, who's seen diversity in the classroom just by as a function of just existing in that space, what does Ashoka need to do now, given that very valid criticisms have been leveled against it?
You see, some of the criticism, I must put this on record, is a trifle misplaced. And that is a function also of an error on our part. We haven't sufficiently publicized or put it out there how much Ashoka actually spends on financial aid. The absolute number, monetary number, is actually staggering.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should do a little more of that, and perhaps Edict has a role to play in that, in trying to inform also students and other readers of Edict that Ashoka might have a very high price tag for full paying students, but it also has a very large window open to get students who cannot afford that price tag by offering them financial aid. The simple principle that we established and we still work on, and we established this in 2013-14 when we were recruiting the first cohort of undergraduates, that if there is any student who meets the intellectual bar of Ashoka and is keen to come to Ashoka, and we want her to come to Ashoka, then finances should not be an obstacle. We will try and overcome that obstacle by providing financial aid, and we continue to do that. Okay, so yes, because we haven't properly publicized or quote unquote advertised this, a lot of underprivileged students feel apprehensive about applying to Ashoka. I think we should try and break this misconception. And one way to do this, of course, is to have greater outreach to schools that are necessarily not elitist. Okay? So, go to the smaller towns, if necessary, even go to the larger villages and schools there, and tell them about Ashoka and the financial scholarships or support that is available, and that not necessarily because of the high price tag, Ashoka is not accessible to them. Ashoka will not compromise on intellectual standards. So if they meet the intellectual standard, then Ashoka is accessible to them, even despite their monetary or financial disadvantages.
I think this is something
We need to work on this. I'm not saying we have completed this entire process. We need greater work on this. And once this begins to happen, I think the almost by definition, the question of caste homogeneity will be broken, where there will be people from diverse castes and backgrounds and regions who will be coming to Ashoka. And I hope that, in my career at Ashoka, I will see that happening to a much larger extent than it has happened so far.
And this is a sentiment that Mr. Bikchandani echoed in our interview with him, where he said that, he said it in far more, to be fair, harsh terms, that we failed in terms of outreach.
Also, you see, if Ashoka has to live up to its own aspiration of being a top class Indian university, I emphasize all those words, it cannot just cater to one group of Indians. Then you are not a representative Indian university. You have failed in that. I think all of us are very conscious of this, but this is not something that can be overcome or can be done overnight, as it were. So I'm very fond of saying, now people say I've made a cliche out of my own saying, that Ashoka is a work in progress, and in my view, for the rest of its life, it will remain a work in progress, because there will always be areas and spheres where we have not quite fulfilled the aspirations that we set ourselves. And what is going to happen now is another challenge, because now, as we succeed, and this is the price of success, society will also be setting aspirations for us. Okay, the larger society.
And
so we have to meet those as well, not just our own aspirations. Some of the societal aspirations will have to be met, and already one of the societal aspirations is Ashoka should become more inclusive and more diverse. That's what society expects of us. That's where your question is coming from, and that's where Sanjeev's admission of failure is also coming from.
I think, and that's a good example of perhaps a societal aspiration, societal expectation of the university and Ashoka's founding ethos sort of being closely aligned with each other. What that does lead me to with cases in which that's not necessarily the case. Yesterday, the Ken released an article on Ashoka and specifically focusing on the entrepreneurship department, and Ashoka is sort of going down the B school route. That's the quote from the piece, but I'm not necessarily asking a question about that. In the piece, though, Professor Parthupratim Das gave a quote, and he said that society, or Indians, are increasingly viewing Ashoka as a 3-department university. There's economics, psychology, and computer science. Economics and psychology, for instance, make up 56% of my batches graduating. This is up from 34% in the founding batch. Is this, do you feel, a compromise on Ashoka's founding vision, that 2 departments take up 2 departments that could be amongst the social sciences and humanities the more vocational ones?
No, I don't think this was a conscious Ashoka decision.
Of course not.
Yes, so this is where societal compulsions and societal expectations come in. The societal expectation or compulsion is that if you do economics or computer science, you have a better job prospect. And unfortunately, a university and education in India is seen completely today as a transactional process. So I'm going to study at Ashoka because Ashoka is going to provide me with a vista to a better placement or a better job. And certainly history or literature is not going to provide that vista, but economics and computer science will provide me with a better vista for a better placement and a better job. So this is how society thinks, right? So this is not just an Indian thing, this is a global thing as well. And Ashoka is in a sense a victim of that societal expectation and societal compulsion. But I don't think because of that Ashoka has stopped emphasizing those disciplines which are less transactional or not transactional at all. I mean, we have recruited some of the best historians in this department. We have recruited some of the best scholars of literature in the literature department. And in philosophy, in Sanskrit, people are being recruited. We are putting in resources there, manpower or human power resources as well as money. We are putting it there to build those departments. So, it's unfortunate that computer science, psychology, and economics hog the students' mind space in such a big way. But let me tell you, these are wheels that turn. Why I say this, I have friends or people I know who have done classics at Oxford. Okay, classics at Oxford means what? They have studied Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, or Hebrew. Okay, that's their major subject. And who is recruiting them? Investment bankers. Why? Because classics is supposed to attract the best brains among the English students, and they want the best brains. Okay, we will teach them the job, what to do with what to do in investment banking. That's the attitude of the people who are hiring. We'll teach them the job, and they will learn very fast because they've got the brains to learn very fast. And that is proved by the fact that they did classics in Oxford and did very well there. I think this is going to happen in Ashoka because they will recruiters will discover that the guy who did history or literature or philosophy at Ashoka is actually as bright and as good as the guy who did economics or computer science. These priorities and emphases are going to change in Indian society. It will take a long time for the change to occur, some time for the change to occur, but it's bound to happen.
And I think as a liberal arts university, or as a university that puts the agency of choice on the student, it is of course the student's decision. The university needs to cater to student demands, and that's something that everybody in the university leadership has said. And so as a result, it's not a compromise on the vision, and I get that. However, this statistic was less disappointing to me, but the next one, I think, made me think a bit more, which is on the major-minor combinations at Ashoka. So, the big message that Ashoka has been giving for the last 10 years is interdisciplinarity, right? Is that it's okay if there are 500 economics graduates because 100 of them would have done sociology, 100 of them would have done history, some would have done media studies. That is becoming less and less the case. Over here, we made a graph of what majors do what minors, and it's a comparison between my batch and the founding batch. And the founding batch is, in many ways, the sort of epitome of liberal arts. Everyone's doing everything; it's a mess. Whereas here, there are these very clear lines that psychology students do entrepreneurship minors, and political science students do IR minors, and eco-fin students do entrepreneurship minors. Can that be addressed by the university?
How do you address that without taking away that element of choice that you emphasize? We cannot dictate what minor or major you're going to do, right? So the student decides, and sometimes sometimes not even students decide. They actually decide under parental pressure or under peer group pressure, or under societal pressure, in the sense that they think that if I do economics and entrepreneurship, or psychology and entrepreneurship, I stand a chance of a better job. That's what's determining these kinds of major minor combinations. Okay, so again, I think it would be simplistic to see Ashoka as some kind of isolated oasis where Ashoka is completely without the determining influences that the macro influences that operate in society. So and that is what's happening in Ashoka. But I'll tell you one thing that is, again, you will probably say that I'm being very optimistic, just like I was being optimistic when I gave you the example that the wheels are going to turn. As interdisciplinary research in Ashoka grows, and we have just taken the first steps to establish interdisciplinary research centers and research groups that are working together. Diverse fields like biology and archaeology, for example, to take the two disciplines that you actually never think of working together. As that happens and that grows, I think this is going to change. This is going to change because people will realize that what can be the interfaces between different disciplines. It's not always that political science has to interface with IR. Yeah. Political science can interface with something else. Psychology can interface with something else rather than just computer science or something. So this is going to happen as what economists call the demonstration effect. As interdisciplinarity grows in Ashoka, the change in the way disciplines are conceived and the interfaces of disciplines are conceived will also undergo a change.
This leads me to what
you see. The one thing that is happening, and all your questions come from that, and I'm not criticizing the questions, by the way, so you don't misunderstand me. Ashoka is just 10 years old, as you said in the very beginning. But Ashoka is a 10-year-old success story. So already the expectations from us are sky high. So already questions have been asked: why haven't you done this? Why aren't you doing this, etc. Yeah, we are getting there. We are getting there. I mean, a university is the proverbial tortoise. It's not the hare.
You may have preempted it, in fact, but there is a double question for me that sort of emerges from this. One is from your position as a professor, because you've now for 10 years taught foundation courses and you've taught compulsory courses. You teach students when they're at the beginning of their journey, HOI4, European history, and of course you do foundation courses. Can you feel, like, I've given you statistical evolution. Can you feel that kind of evolution in the classroom? How have you had to change the way you've had to teach, not just fundamentally as a result of this, not anything else? And the second question comes from not the fact that you're a professor, but the fact that your sort of vast experience and being in touch with the times, as it were. How much of this is a function of the times? You've alluded to it about the wheel of time. And as people in the humanities, how do we make a case for the humanities in the times we live in?
So let's take the first one because it's a simpler one to answer. I actually prefer to take absolutely fresh minds and kind of take them by the hand and instruct them about how to think, how to use their minds, and free them from the shackles of rote learning, which is what informed their learning when they were in school. And this is particularly true for history, because that's what you're taught in school. History is a marked subject. Okay, so I like doing that, loosening those shackles, if not completely breaking those shackles. And it's also an exciting thing for me to see how this happens to students when you start teaching them in a different way altogether, and you tell them that history is not about a feat of memory. History is also about understanding, comprehension, interpretation, joining dots, whatever the phrase you want to use. So that's one thing that I really enjoy, and therefore in that teaching I try to bring in as many elements as I can from my own reading and experience. In many cases I deal with a lot of economic history, so when I'm teaching history of India 4 or European history, I do a lot of economic history, so I have to sometimes explain very basic economic concepts. I mean, beginning with what is demand, what is supply, how does the market operate and things like that. I'm just taking offhand examples. But also, I have not just taught this foundation courses and basic compulsory course, gateway at the Ashoka jargon is. But I've taught specialized courses as well. My course on Marx particularly was very popular, and it drew in students from history, philosophy, politics, economics, and one could therefore have this intermeshing of various disciplines and how they come together in Marxist ideas. So that was also a very challenging course, but perhaps the most challenging course I have taught at Ashoka, and this is a very interesting example, and if I don't put it on record to the edict, it will never get captured in the history of Ashoka. In 2016 or 17, I think it was 17, two students came here in this room, and they said, "Professor, we want you to offer a course on the Bhagavad Gita." So I said, "What do you mean you want me to offer a course? I don't want to offer that course." And so they said, "Why not?" He said, "Because," I said, I don't know the Bhagavad Gita very well to offer it. And also because I don't know it, it's not a text that I think I can teach. So they said, "No, we know Bhagavad Gita. You don't know the Bhagavad Gita very well, and it is not one of your favorite texts, but we would like you to offer it because of the way you teach, the interactive process through which you teach. We want to read the Bhagavad Gita with you." So I said, "Give me a little time." Okay, so I took about 48 hours, and they kept coming every day to pester me even though it's 48 hours. Please, please. So finally I said, "Yes, I will teach it. I will not teach it, I will read it with you. The class will be held in this room, capped at 8 students." Okay. So for a full semester, we read, the 8 of us together, we read the Bhagavad Gita line by line. Okay. Each one of us giving his or her separate interpretation and reading of the verses that we were reading. Okay. And then of course we had assignments, essays to write or commentaries to write, which we evaluated all together. Right? And that's how it was a unique teaching experiment, and it was perhaps the most enriching experience I've had as a teacher. And only Ashoka could have provided me with the space for that experiment. And only Ashoka gives the students the freedom to come to a vice chancellor's room and say, "We want you to teach this course." No questions asked. Do you want to do it or nothing? It was virtually a demand on their part, which ultimately I am very happy that I conceded and yielded to, because I got to read the Bhagavad Gita in my own way. I don't know what they learned from me. All of them still swear that that's the best course they did in their 3 years at Ashoka. But I learned an enormous amount by reading the text with them.
This is a brilliant example, but it was in 2016 and 17. Similarly, in one of your pieces, I think it was Ranjit Guha's the obituary, you mentioned a story about the first time you read that that universities had shut down and Burunde had said, you have to read this. He'd taken it upon himself. Is the space for that? How optimistic are you that the space for that is still alive in Ashoka, with big classes?
No, it's still alive. It's very, very alive, and students still come to me, both from YIF and undergraduates, asking me for very specialized readings. I have had students who, I'm going away for the summer, it's a long break, give me a reading list. Okay, so just as in my case, it was not a very common example. A lot of my fellow students envied me because I had the access to Burunde, who could give me a reading list like this. It was not a common thing that was happening. Similarly, I don't think it's a common thing at Ashoka, but the space is there.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's happening with other professors as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of how a professor makes himself or herself accessible to the student. My standard Ashoka question, I'm sure you have asked and others have asked their professor, what is your office hour? What are your office hours? Now, I have no office hours. My simple answer is, if I'm in office, that's an office hour. Just walk in. Okay? My students have I used to say that when I was Vice Chancellor. My students have the first priority on my time. So, but then you have somewhat reversed the responsibility. It's up to the student to take advantage of this open door policy that is being provided. And some of them do, and some of them don't. But to specifically answer your question, I think the space exists.
We'll sort of, towards the end, come back to you. At the YIF convocation, you broke with sort of chancellorial tradition to take a moment for Manipur and for Gaza and for Ukraine. And it was really powerful. I watched it on YouTube, and I could feel it through my screen. And this was in the aftermath of a few weeks before the Ashoka administration explicitly not allowing solidarity for Palestine at the undergraduate and ASP convocations. That moment where you chose to say those words, it felt like it was not Rudrangshu Mukherjee, the Chancellor of Ashoka University, speaking, but Rudrangshu Mukherjee, the Professor of History, and Rudrangshu Mukherjee, the person speaking. And I'm a little bit interested in how you balance those roles, because there have been times where this university has been marred with controversy, and there has been times, I don't think you'll deny, where we have been on the wrong side of history. How do you personally deal with that, given your role? What are perhaps the foundational things you go back to sort of be yourself and deal with these things?
So, what is our issue here? If I might break down your question, the issue is between my personal ego and my institutional role. Okay? Now, invariably there is going to be a set of overlaps between my personal values and the Ashokan values. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here in the first place. And the second is, of course, in the process of Ashoka evolving and Rudrangshu Mukherjee evolving, that might arise on which the two, the personal and the institutional clash, or they don't converge. Clash might be too strong a word.
Yeah.
They don't converge. Now, this is where I think an individual, or I have to make a choice. Okay, which is more important to me? The institution, the survival of the institution, the growth of the institution, or my own personal beliefs, values, etc., etc. Okay. Now, if these two were to move further and further apart, right, then as a professor of history, as a human being, and as a chancellor, the only option open to me is to move away from Ashoka. Other than that, I have no. Or to say I am surrendering my values completely and giving way to what the institution wants to do. Now, at one level, I'm not completely independent of the institution, because I also fashion the values that make the institution. Okay, so hard cases make bad laws. So extreme situations are always difficult situations. And what I am describing is a difficult situation, very difficult situation, extreme situation, where my personal values and the values of the institution, which I helped to shape in a very major way, have fallen apart. So I am partly responsible then if this drift is taking place. Why did I allow the drift to take place? I could have stopped it, stemmed it before it happened. So that's how one navigates this, right? And that moment which you so kindly mentioned is one process or one step in that navigational process. Okay, something that you thought was, I thought at least, that we should be doing, and I did. And I didn't think that this was going to harm the institution in any way. That's a call I had to take. Okay, and I knew that a lot of people might be surprised, might be shocked, but I also knew that most people would stand by me and be moved by, as you said, by what I said.
But that must be, I mean, the merging, as you described just now, of your almost your personhood and the university, just by virtue of you being there at its kind of origin point, that must take a toll, right? It's not like this is a quiet university. There's something every few months.
I don't think university should be quiet, actually. I think it's a sign of health that universities are noisy. Okay, sometimes I may not approve of the noise. That's a different matter altogether. But you are teaching students every passing hour in the classroom, think for yourself. Then you can't suddenly say, don't think for yourself. There will be issues on which groups of students will think for themselves, and therefore, make a noise if they find that what they are thinking is at dissonance with what is happening.
Like it was perhaps in the case of Professor Sabyasachi.
Yeah, something like that, So, I don't want the university to be a quiescent place. That would just tell me that we are not teaching students to think. We are not producing robots here. I hope not. Now, that will be the real divergence. If I find that Ashoka is working towards creating robots, that's the time to go.
And finally, I think it's quite safe to say, achieved everything. Like at one level, taught for many years at a very high level, written countless books. I see your name in the newspaper every few weeks, perhaps something or the other on the columns. What continues to drive you? I understand young scholars having things to, work for, not teach this and not teach that. That's perhaps not the case with you. There's no tangible thing that I can think of that you're searching for. So, what is it that continues to make you come to this university, take on an administrative role, wake up at 8:30 in the morning and teach, and I suppose the next question is, what's next for Rudrangshu Mukherjee, and as a result of that, what's next for Ashoka University?
So, the simple answer to that 8:30 example that you gave is, I began with, I love teaching. If you ask me to get up at 6 to teach, I would wake up at 6 to teach. No, and the 8:30 thing also has a very simple explanation. I live here. Okay. Now, it's very unfair of me to expect somebody who is commuting from Delhi to come and do the 8:30 class when I can easily say, I live across the lawn, I'll do the 8:30 class. Okay, it's just that little bit of consideration on my part to say that, okay, I mean, instead of getting up at 7:30, I'll get up at 6 and come and do the 8:30 class. What do I lose? I lose nothing. So that was one very big consideration when I decided I would do the 8:30 classes. The other thing is, I think of myself as an intellectual. Intellectual not in the conventional sense of the word intellectual, but in the more broader sense as somebody who lives for and through one's intellect. Okay, that's my primary focus and my primary concern. So, I'm interested in knowing. I'm interested in understanding. I'm interested in enriching my own mind. So therefore, I continue to read, write, teach. That's what drives me. Whatever I think will enrich my intellect, I pursue that. It might be a piece of music, a piece of cinema, a book to read, a class to teach, an essay to write. I do that. And I still think that as an intellectual and as a writer, I still haven't fulfilled my full potential. That's another driving force.
You also always a work in progress. Just like Ashoka.
Absolutely. Absolutely. None of the books you said countless, but I don't think, and don't accuse me of being falsely modest. I'm not actually a very modest person. You might have discovered that I don't think any of my books deserve the epithet great. I want to write a great book. And I have my own intellectual measures and yardsticks of what constitutes a great book.
I think that's a perfect way to end. Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for this interview. And hopefully, we will review that great book on the Erect someday. But thank you so much.
Thank you.